is not going to look anything like anything you've ever studied. If you've studied about the temple, it's not going to look like that. If you've seen pictures and diagrams, it's not going to look like that. Why? Well, first of all, because most of what we study and see pictures and diagrams of is all what the second temple looked like. And we know, based on the prophet Ezekiel, Yechezkel, the third temple is going to be so much more massive. I do have a book actually with pictures and diagrams of the third temple, but like it's not really studied because so little is known about it compared to the second. That's already how the third is going to look so much different than anything we have in our brains from the second, from any pictures and diagrams of the second, but it's beyond that. It's brought down in various sources, and Lubavitcher Rebbe focuses on this, that every synagogue in the entire world, any legitimate synagogue, will be uprooted, will travel, and will join with the temple. Not only that, it says that in every generation, there's always the place of the leader of the generation, like the temple in exile. And every one of those temples and exiles will literally fly and become fused with the temple. Psalms, and we explained how Psalms has this very special power, because on one hand, it's Torah. It's one of the 24 books. We have 24 books of the written Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, and then we have the books of the prophets, and then we have the books of the writings. All of together create the written Torah, scriptures. And one of the books of the writings is Tehilim, is Psalm. So it is literally one of the 24 books of Torah. And we said that it's also used by the Jewish people as a form of prayer. That we open up the Tehilim, the Psalms, and we talk to God in moments of distress, when we need Him, when we're turning to Him, when we're thanking Him. In all of our different situations, we for thousands of years have opened up a book of Psalms, opened up a Tehilim and spoken to God, and the words are so powerful and resonate. We're towards the middle of discussing chapter 123, which is a very, very beautiful, moving chapter that, when I think about it, really affects me. It also happens to be Lubavitcher Rebbe's chapter of this year. I also wanted to do with you, God willing, 2 more chapters of Psalms, chapter 23 and chapter 20, because those are Psalms that many of us say and turn to when we're looking to talk to God through Psalms. I'm going to be giving just the English translation of Psalm 123. Now again, when you're saying Psalms, obviously for studying and also for prayer, it's totally fine to do it in the English. As we've said many times, if one can read the Hebrew, that's amazing, because obviously the Hebrew is precisely the words that were chosen. But if one cannot, it's totally appropriate and acceptable to pray in English, to study Torah in English, to say Psalms in English, or any other language. So Psalm 123, the song of ascents. To you, to God, I lift up my eyes, the one who dwells in the heavens. Behold, like the eyes of the servants to the hand of their master, like the eyes of the maidservant to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes are to God, our God, until He'll be gracious to us. Be gracious to us, God, be gracious to us, because we've suffered such disgrace. Much we have been satiated, our souls, with the mockery of the complacent ones, with the scorn of the arrogant ones. And this psalm, we said last time, the different commentators focus on different ideas. So Rashi says, if you remember, we're talking of how the nations destroyed Jerusalem. And that's the pain that we're turning to God to comfort us for. Ibn Ezra, another classical commentator, said that this is a person suffering from his own personal distresses and turning to God because, as we discussed at length, everything is from God. All the good, all that we rejoice in, all that we feel the divine beneficence, and everything that's hard to us, it's all from God. So knowing it's all from God, like the servant to his master that knows everything he has is from his master, he says, be gracious to me. I know it's all you, I know it's all good, but please give me good that I understand as good. Now, though, if you actually look on top of the psalm, in all the Hebrew texts, meaning if someone has a book of Psalms, on top of each psalm, there's a small line in very tiny print, which is sort of like giving I'm going to say synopsis, but I don't think that's exactly the right word, giving over what is the point of this psalm. Now, these lines were written by a very holy Jew, and therefore we look at them as very legitimate and really expressive of the crux issue of the psalm. So on Psalm 123, that line says, the composer here is lamenting, not as Rashi said, the destruction of Jerusalem per se, or as Ibn Ezra said, one's personal suffering, but lamenting the long, enormous time that have passed that we have been in exile. So according to that synopsis of the psalm, this is a lament. Be gracious to us, be gracious to us. God, please help us, because we've been in exile for a very, 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 very long time. It was interesting because the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who gives his commentary on this psalm, the entire commentary is very in sync with this one line as expressive of the pain of exile and the need for redemption. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once said that if you're focused on something, wherever you look, that's what you see. And of course, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is very focused on redemption. He actually once told the representative of another great Jewish leader, referred to as the Gerer Rebbe, he once said to the representative of the Gerer Rebbe, they say about me that I'm crazy about redemption, crazy about Mashiach. So wherever the Lubavitcher Rebbe looks, for sure, he sees redemption, and especially in a psalm where the crux of it is this lament over the long, long duration of exile. So we're lifting up our eyes to the heavens to say, when will this exile be over? We've been here too long. We've suffered too much. Obviously, unfortunately, we know this isn't past tense. We've lived through this year. This is a current reality. We still are suffering too much persecution, continuing until this literally very moment. Maybe a year ago, we'd have been complacent and said, we suffered. Now we know it's unfortunately a current reality. Do you have things in your life that make you feel, yes, we are still in exile? Does that sense of exile, does that resonate? Do you feel the exile in our current existence? Does that sound real to you? That we're in exile? That we're not where we're supposed to be? That there's a lot of things in the world that are not as they should be and that they're wrong and need godly correction?
Absolutely.
No question.
Absolutely. Most of it for me is disagreement among Jews, that there is no unity. It's and how many Jews lost their way towards Torah, and they like for myself, I'm just saying how I lived most of my life not knowing the treasure that I was born into. And Baruch Hashem, that later in my life, my eyes were open and I understood, and I was my people, and it's so painful that a lot of Soviet Jews were forced to live without Torah. And but Cyril, I hear from Erev, for people who Kirov, that these days only Russian Jews are returning. So there is something in Russian Jews that brings them back to Torah. Not American, less of American Jews, but Russian Jews. So that was really music to my ears.
I don't know if that is correct, but what I will say, I was thinking as you were talking that when the Rebbe was talking, the Rebbe already like in 1990, I think. It was in 1990. I don't remember exactly. Maybe in 1989. I think maybe 1989, where the Rebbe said to build a settlement, that the Jews are going to come out of Russia, and to build a settlement for them. And they built I don't know how many hundreds of apartments they built in a section in Jerusalem as this Russian Chabad settlement, because the Rebbe said they're coming out. Now, when the Rebbe said this, actually it's very interesting, because this is when, yes, Gorbachev had just been elected, and the head of the network of Chabad in Russia, which was called Shamir, so this was like a secret organization in Russia to help the Russian Jews and to help them stay connected to God, or connect them to God. And this was headed by Professor Branover, who was originally from Russia and was a very, very famous scientist that had gotten out of Russia, thank God, with Rebbe's miracles, and was in Jerusalem. He was a professor in the yeshiva, in the university in the Negev, I believe. He had a whole laboratory there. And so the Rebbe communicated to Professor Branover to build this settlement in Jerusalem because the Russians are going to come out. And when Branover spoke to his network in Russia, they're like, no way. Gorbachev was just elected and he's a hardliner and forget glasnost and everything's going back and no way, no way, no way. Rebbe said, I don't know, this is what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said. So he built, not at all having any conception of the need and the quantity and the numbers that would come out. And it was very interesting because years later, Gorbachev was making like this world tour. And when he came to Israel, he actually met with Professor Branover, who was a very big person in Israel and representative of Russian Jews on a certain level. And when he met with Gorbachev and he told him the story, he said, shortly after you were elected, Lubavitcher Rebbe, and Gorbachev said, your people were right. When I was elected, I had no intention of what happened. I don't know, just somehow it happened. But it's interesting because I'm pointing out this idea of how the Rebbe was very focused that the Russian Jews were getting in. Now, of course, you could say the Rebbe has a very deep relationship with Russian Jews, and the Rebbe, of course, came from Russia, from the Ukraine, and the Rebbe, of course, had this whole network in Russia to help the Jews of Russia and to maintain some connection to God. But it's more than that. It really has probably something to do with redemption, because the last talk we have from the Rebbe, which was in 1992, the last time the Rebbe spoke to us, the Rebbe said that the movement of the Jews from Russia to Israel is like the beginning of the ingathering of the exiles. So the Rebbe looked at this bigger even than we do. The Rebbe literally saw this movement of Russian Jews as beginning this messianic phenomena. The two ultimate signs of the redemption are the temple and the ingathering of the exiles. And the Rebbe said all of these Jews, and I don't know the number, so I'm not going to give a number, but maybe someone here does know, all of the Jews that went from Russia to Israel, not the ones that went to America or Italy, the ones that went to Israel, that's beginning what's classically referred to as the ingathering of the exiles. So it does have a huge power and a huge messianic power, what your friends are telling you, that the Jews today from Russia are returning to God. But I think it's very beautiful and shows Rivka's very lofty nature, that when she's seeing exile, she's seeing it because of the pain of people being so far from God and the pain of people not being united. And it is true, because unfortunately we sort of take it as de facto disunity or worse, but it truly is an aberration we've lived with for way, way, way too long. Anyone else? Anyone else has something that they would point to as, yes, this to them is a sign that we are in exile?
That my grandchildren are not absorbent.
That's a deep pain. That's a deep exile. That's a deep pain. I'm sure we can all echo that feeling of not with our children or grandchildren, that deep pain of them not being connected to God as we would want.
But again, at some point, Cyril, I think you said that they are not responsible, like we are not either, because nobody gave us this knowledge. When I came to America, I didn't know that I could have sent my daughter to religious school. I didn't, because what did I know?
Definitely. There's a concept in Jewish law that it says that someone who was raised without a knowledge of Judaism is considered technically like a child, like stolen by the gypsies, so to speak, captured among the nations and raised without a knowledge of their heritage. Can we blame such a person? No. Can we punish such a person? No. But is there deep, deep, deep pain for that soul that's stuck here without being able to do what the soul wants and craves and needs and is in this world to do, which is to connect to God? Yes. The deep pain is there, and that deep pain will affect the person's life. There's two dimensions on what happens if a person doesn't serve God. There's punishment and there's consequence. If you eat unhealthy food and you don't feel good after, it's not that you had divine retribution. You just feel gross because you put gross stuff in your body. So if a person sins, knowing there's a God, knowing his responsibilities to God, and he doesn't repent, there's punishment, there's consequence, which is really part of God's kind system to wake us up and stop us from falling off the deep end and remind us to return to him, which is such a kindness that we get these warning signs. Stop, return, come close to me. This is your best life. This is what you want. So someone who doesn't know anything, well, he's not given these warning signs that he would have no way of translating / punishment for sins he's not aware that he's sinning. Nothing like that. But if you don't do what's healthy for you, you don't feel good. So there's the natural consequence of not living a godly life. When God gave us the laws, every law has so many facets. And one facet, of course, is God has a need for us to serve him this way. One facet is this is how we refine the world and create redemption. And one facet is this is the best thing for you in this world. Best thing for your body, best thing for your soul. Kosher is the best way for a Jew to eat. Best for our soul, best for our body. Modest is the best way for us to dress. Best for our soul and best for our body. To be careful not to gossip, not to lie, not to take what's not ours is the best thing for my soul and the best thing for my body. So a Jew who doesn't know and is transgressing, he's not being punished, but he's not living his best life. Not spiritually and not physically, because this is the best way. This is the right way. This is how we're wired. And they don't know, so they're not doing it. But definitely 100%, there is no direct punishment for someone who transgresses from ignorance. And definitely you are right. Just as what Rivka said was so deep and true, what you are saying is so deep and true. What is more expressive of exile? Now, if we could look at our own parents or children or grandparents or siblings or anyone that we're so close to and say, and they're so clueless. They don't have a relationship with God, and that's so painful. That's so deeply, deeply, deeply painful. But if it's someone close to you, you can always do something and who knows what's going to awaken in someone else's heart. You know, as we do, you never know. I just heard this story. I don't believe I said this in the class. Maybe I did. I don't think so. If I did, my apologies. Someone stopped me, but I don't think I did. And this is a story I just heard. It's seemingly a well-known story that somehow missed my radar. It has your story of someone I was close to. I mean, not close to, someone I have a relationship with. And she grew up in Minnesota. It's probably in like the 70s, but then she was probably like, the late 70s. She was college, post-college, and her American Jew, no relation. I'm going to say it really briefly, but no awareness of Judaism as anything besides something nice that like her grandparents used to do. Of course, they passed away a while ago. And at some point, her brother, who was a teenager, a 15, 16-year-old kid, he said he wanted to become religious. She's like, are you crazy? That's like for our grandparents who are no longer around. That's not for normal Americans like us. He said, no, he wants to be religious. And through him, she started reading things about Judaism, and it really like made her interested. Like, this is really actually cool, and this is actually really deep, and this is actually meaningful. And she didn't know there was such depth and truth and philosophy and theology in Judaism. But she still didn't feel like it was hers. And she kept trying, like, keep a Shabbos here or there, but it just felt very like not her. And this was finally a situation where she sort of was like, okay, I'm done. I tried. It didn't work for me. It's for some people. It's beautiful. It's not for me. And she was going to spend that weekend with her friends in the country. And then last minute, she changed her mind. She said, you know what? I'm going to give Shabbos one last chance. She was in Minnesota, and she didn't know it happened to be a very auspicious date in the Chabad calendar, and she was connected to the Chabad community there, and she's keeping her Shabbos and feeling it's very beautiful, but it's not really me. And Saturday night there was this gathering because it was a Hasidic date. It was the anniversary of the passing, I believe, of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, some 30 years before, and almost 30 years before. And there's actually, I think this was in 77 or 78 when this happened. And there's a speaker there from Chicago, and he begins the evening by saying, everything is the hand of God, as we call it, Hashgacha Pratis. Everything is exactly divine, specific. And he starts talking, and he's speaking about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he's saying all these stories to connect the audience to a person that passed away 30 years ago, roughly. And obviously most of them never met him, have no connection to him, and trying to make them understand who he was and his powers. And he's just saying different stories, personal stories he knew, connecting with the previous Rebbe. And then he started telling a story about some man in Chicago whose name he said, who I forget. He said he was the head of this was right after the war, this was in 1947, he was the head of the Chicago Jewish Relief Fund, that all over America, Jews were organizing to raise money for the survivors of the Holocaust. American Jewry carried tremendous pain, motivated by a lot of love, motivated by a lot of concern, motivated by a lot of compassion. Jews raised enormous sums, considering we're talking about 1947. This organization in Chicago raised $180,000. That is huge in 1947. And the head of the organization went personally to France to the DP camps there to give them money to help the refugees. And when he came back, he said he wanted to meet with this man who was the speaker at this event. His name was Rabbi Hecht. And he said he wanted to meet with him because when he was in one of these DP camps, he saw a little boy who was obviously hungry and tattered, and he didn't have proper food, let alone a candy, let alone a toy. And he was so touched by this boy, he said, "What can I do for you? Here he's this rich American, here's this impoverished refugee. What can I do for you?" And he said, "You know what this boy told me? This boy said, I want to go to America to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe." And he was so stunned. He's like, who is this Lubavitcher Rebbe? That this little boy across the ocean, who's obviously hungry, obviously has nothing, and all he could think that he would want is to see the Rebbe. He said, I didn't know a person like that existed in the world. And he said to this Rabbi Hecht, who was a chassid, a follower of the Rebbe, can you arrange for me a meeting with the Rebbe? I want to meet the Rebbe. I want to see who is this person that could have such impact on a child across the ocean. And it was in those days already pretty hard to have a connection, a personal audience with the Rebbe. The Rebbe was physically not well, but Rabbi Hecht managed to make an audience for him, and he went to New York. He traveled to New York especially, which in those days wasn't like jumping on a plane, to see the Rebbe. And when he came back, this is all of this story Rabbi Hecht is giving over. He said when he came back, he spoke to Rabbi Hecht. He said it was the most amazing, incredible experience of his life. And he spoke what the Rebbe said to him in his communal works, in his business. And then the Rebbe said to him, this is why I'm saying the story, I'm thinking of Rachel. The Rebbe said, and what about your children? And he said, and then he started to cry because he said, I have 6 children and none of them are religious today. Now, obviously, this man was religious and raised all of his children religious, but America in the 1940s was a very big challenge, and none of his children were religious. And he said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I mean, the previous Rebbe said to him, they'll come back. And this Rabbi Hecht was giving over this story, and he said, I have no clue what happened because this man passed away many years ago. I don't know what happened to his children and grandchildren, but this is a promise of a very, very holy Jew, a tzaddik, a Rebbe, and for sure it was fulfilled. And my friend who was in the audience, she burst into tears because that man was her grandfather. And she realized that everything, as the speaker said at the beginning of his talk, was a hand of God. And why did she not go to the country that Shabbos? Why did she give Shabbos one more time? Why was she sitting there? Why was this rabbi from Chicago, who they tried for years to get to speak, and he finally agreed that weekend, and who actually passed away a few months later, and the story would have gone to his grave with him? Why did all the details line up for her to hear this and for her to return to God, which she did? And her name is Shifra Chana Hendry, and she lives in Jerusalem, and she's quite a well-known person today herself. So why am I saying this to Rachel? Because people sometimes return on their merits, and people sometimes return on the merits of their parents and grandparents, and who knows, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. We have all these people in Mexico, raised Catholics, who had some turning to God and traced in their lineage that they're descendants of Marranos, some of them on both sides. And they've undergone conversions, and they're religious Jews today. And when I think of that, I think of, imagine the souls above of their ancestors. They maybe perished. They brought the auto de fe to the New World. They maybe perished there or had to live their life as Catholics. And imagine what's happening to those souls when a descendant of theirs comes back to God. So we never know, we never give up, and we always know that whatever we're doing is not only our personal example that can help our children and grandchildren, it's also merit. And that merit is very, very, very powerful. Anyway, that was quite long, so we will get back to what we were doing. That was a very long segue, but it very much was true, what Rachel said of what is the pain of exile. The pain of exile is our disunity, we're told. The pain of exile is so many Jews that don't know God, and the pain of exile is very much when it's our own family. So sure, Rachel.
Question. This Rabbi Hecht, is it the same family that we know in Evanston?
Oh, no relationship at all.
No.
No relationship at all. No. This is the family that in Evanston. Yeah, they're not at all related, but within the world of Lubavitch, of Chabad, there is a very well-known Hecht family, and he is one of the original brothers. There were like, I don't remember how many, several brothers, all very prominent and all in their own ways did a lot for the Rebbe Chabad. And the emissary in Chicago, who passed away relatively young, I think in 1979 or something like that, was one of the brothers, a very famous brother, J.J. Hecht, that did a lot in New York. There was a brother that did a lot in New Haven, but the Hechts that you know, no relationship. Or maybe, no, not that we know any relationship, but sure, absolutely. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe is saying that this chapter, which again, as we're saying, is actually the synopsis, that one-line synopsis on what's the crux of this chapter is pleading for redemption. So if we're looking in the chapter, it says, I lift up my eyes to the heavens. And we're like, the Rebbe is like, why do we have to lift up our eyes to the heavens, to the one who dwells in the heavens? I mean, God is all over. We don't need to lift up our eyes to connect to God. But actually, the point is that the first step is lifting up our eyes not to the heavens, lifting our eyes past the heavens, higher than the heavens, because we want to connect to God on the highest levels possible. Then we could go down to the God who dwells in the heavens. And then, of course, as God comes down to this world. Sort of interesting, we speak about lifting up your eyes, that our sages say that when you pray, you know what direction our sages say our eyes should be when you pray? Any ideas? When you pray, your eyes should be looking down. The Psalm said, I lift up my eyes to the heavens, or as the Rebbe is saying, I lift up my eyes even higher than the heavens. And the sages say when you pray, your eyes should be down. But the sages say your eyes should be down and your heart should be focused up. So we really want to lift up our eyes and to look down with our eyes. Meaning we want to lift up our eyes to be focused on God above, and we also want to be looking down because we want to take this God energy and bring it down to our world, down to the physical, down to the world as we live in. We don't want to be just remote and like floating on planet number or somewhere up there. No. Whatever we see, whatever spiritual energy we're connecting to, we want to bring it down to the reality of planet Earth, which sort of connects to the redemption because Mashiach, the Redeemer, has both of these realities. When it speaks of the Redeemer, the sages give us two visions. One is based on the verses of the prophets. We have the Redeemer as the poor man riding on the donkey, and we have the Redeemer flying in with the clouds. Because we could have a looking down at this world, the poor man on the donkey, meaning symbolizing working through the donkey. Donkey, the word donkey in Hebrew represents coarseness, materialism, working through the coarseness of this world to refine the world. And that's sort of the redemption when it comes by D-Day in its time. And then there's the Redeemer looking up to the heavens, coming in the clouds, a revelation from above, created by our merits. The Redeemer that comes, the poor man on the donkey, refining this world. And in its time, the Redeemer coming with the clouds, coming with flying in on our merits, focus above, and coming early. And really the point is a fusion of those two. Like when you're praying, look up. When you're praying, look down. Look up and look down. Fuse the two. Our focus has to be like that poor man on the donkey. Donkey, materialism, coarseness, to refine the world, to make the world a vehicle for redemption. And at the same time, we need those revelations from the clouds of the heavens. We need that higher godliness, that higher spirituality, that higher energy that we could pull into our world. And that's redemption. Fusing above and below, looking up and looking down, bringing all the merits of above and all the earthiness of our world in a synergy. And that's redemption. You know, talking about redemption, it's been a lot of years we've had this class. It's been a lot of years that you've learned about redemption, you've heard of redemption, you've been exposed to the concept of many ideas. Does it seem more real to you now? Like over your progression of years? Is it more like plausible to you that it's coming now?
I want to tell you quickly, I already told you that my niece is considering sending her little girl to a Jewish day school. And I'm praying that it will happen. So I'm trying to inspire her, and I'm telling her about redemption, how we all end up living in Eretz Israel. She's married, my niece is married to a Jewish man whose father is not Jewish. So I'm telling her, I said, Hebrew, but English name is Michelle, so I'm telling her Michelle. So when we end up in living in Israel, you will live in a Levite city. I'm telling her how we all have land there, but it comes from our, as a tribal of the father. I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk faster. But I said, you will live in the Levite city because your husband's, he's Jew, but he doesn't have a Jewish father. Is that correct?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know if it's correct, meaning there is the concept of the tribal lands being given back. And the question would be, as you're saying, that first of all, of course, we have the concept of, but we want to all live in Jerusalem. So are we going to be living in our tribal lands, or we'll be living in Jerusalem? And there's definitely the idea that the Bible is actually that the houses that were used to serve God, those houses themselves will fly and will come somewhere in Israel and hopefully somewhere in close proximity to the temple itself. So that implies that though we will have tribal lands, but not necessarily will ever be living in the tribal area, because we might want to be living in closer proximity to the temple than our tribal area. So I don't know how that's going to work out. I don't know if that means like we're going to have an estate, like our summer home, our land somewhere, but we're actually living, we might want to be living in closer proximity to the temple. So your niece said, to continue the story,
she was getting excited about it, because when I talk about it, I'm passionate about it, because I always like to think, oh, I'm going to live close to my brother-in-law, because Jeff and his brother are going to be from the same, from the same tribe. My son, our son's going to be live with me, and then I'm thinking, what about my sister? What about her husband? So I like to talk about it, and I get passionate about it. Who we're going to live close by, where. And then I'm saying to Michelle the thing. Michelle is the only child, and her father. So I'm saying, Michelle, you're an only child. Your father is Jewish, so he probably is an Israelite. He has the land, and according to Torah, 5 Salafat's daughters, we know that if there are no male, I said to her that by law, your father's land should go to you. So we're discussing all this, that I said, and then you have only one child, so the land, probably the land of your father will go to you. So you can take your husband and go live there in the land. So we were discussing it.
It's great. It's great. It's great when you bring it into those details, because it's like, oh, it has this reality feel that makes it. Yes, I never went in that direction. I think in other directions, but definitely in that same way of like the details of the reality of it. Because the more the details of the reality of it, the more it's like, yeah, it feels so real. You feel so in sync with it. So you're getting excited about the families all rejoining, or anything else that really makes you know it's real. And there was interesting because the Bible will give many details. And I think every detail just, again, creates the reality. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so wonderful that you don't just have the reality of it, but you can inspire someone else with it. That's really, really, really special and really expressive of passion. Menucha?
Yes, can I ask a question? It's very interesting. So my husband also is listening, and he asked a question: if a male made the conversion, Giur, and became a Jew, so when redemption comes, which tribe he's going to belong and which land he's going to get in Israel?
That's a really good question. I think that was sort of what Rivka was going in the lines of her niece, whose husband's father was not Jewish. So what happened to his land? I would imagine Just like in the desert, there was that area for the people that were converts, right? Because already in the desert, we had the converts that left Egypt, and that's where they lived. What were called the Erev, the mixed multitude, were the converts that left Egypt, and they weren't allowed to live with any of the other tribes. They were all the tribes, and every tribe in the desert also had it wasn't land, but its camping grounds. And the converts and the children of the converts lived separately. They had the place where they lived. So it could be like Rivka was saying in the idea of the Levite cities, that I understood why she went in that direction. It could be that they would have their separate lands. It says also, in terms of the Levites actually, that in the times of redemption, the Levites will also have a portion in the land. It's one of the explanations, one of the commentaries, because it says then the land will be divided into 13 sections, not 12, meaning there were 12 tribes and the Levites. And originally the Levites did not have their lands. They had cities. There was I think 48 cities, 42, 48 cities of the Levites. But in the times of redemption, the Levites will also have tribal land. So I don't know. That's a great question, and I will look into it. I will do my homework, and if I find a better answer, I will post it. There's so many things. I'm not going to start raising them, but there's so many things that I also wonder different nuances in the details of the reality of redemption. And some of the things I'm like, you know what? We'll find out. We'll find out. But I do want to say, as I said to Rivka, that my vision isn't of me living in my tribal estate wherever that is, wherever my husband's land is, but me living close to the temple. Because I'm sure we're all going to want to be close to the temple. And even though we will have these tribal lands, but the temple itself, just to understand this, is not going to look anything like anything you've ever studied. If you've studied about the temple, it's not going to look like that. If you've seen pictures and diagrams, it's not going to look like that. Why? Well, first of all, because most of what we study and see pictures and diagrams of is all what the second temple looked like. And we know, based on the prophet Ezekiel, Yechezkel, the third temple is going to be so much more massive. I do have a book actually with pictures and diagrams of the third temple, but it's not really studied because so little is known about it compared to the second. That's already how the third is going to look so much different than anything we have in our brains from the second, from any pictures and diagrams of the second, but it's beyond that. It's brought down in various sources, and Lubavitcher Rebbe focuses on this, that every synagogue in the entire world, any legitimate synagogue, will be uprooted, will travel, and will join with the temple. Not only that, it says that in every generation, there's always the place of the leader of the generation, like the temple in exile. And every one of those temples and exiles will literally fly and become fused with the temple. It even says, there's even a source that says Mount Sinai will fly and become fused with the temple. So if we can just envision, which we can't, but just the temple itself, but then surrounded by rings and rings and rings of all places where God was served over our entire world, and not just now, historically, all of these holy places, and based on the holiness of the place, that's its proximity, that's where it's positioned, in these rings and rings and rings. And then there's the Jewish people, that all of them, as they come and they settle in Israel, are going to also want to be settling in proximity to the temple. So there's going to be where your tribal land is, and there's also going to be where your house might be in a different place, because it might be a bit closer to the temple than wherever your tribal land is. But definitely I will look into it. Where will the converse be in the times of redemption? Now, of course, as I'm sure is known, there will be no concept of conversion once redemption happens. So the idea of a convert is only someone that converted before the complete revelation of redemption, which maybe is why it seems like there's such a impetus of conversion in our world now, like never before, because every convert actually, I just heard this yesterday. I always knew a certain concept, and then yesterday I heard an explanation of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that made this concept even more intense. It says in the Talmud, the convert who converts. And the Hasidic explanation, what does it mean, the convert that converts? You're not a convert who converts. You're a non-Jew who converts. You're not Jew and then you become a convert. You're not a convert that converts. And Hasidus explains that no, every single legitimate kosher convert started off different than a regular non-Jew. They started off as a regular non-Jew, and they had a spark in them, a spark of God propelling them to convert. Because converting is a completely irrational act, a real Orthodox conversion. To really understand what it means to take on this yoke, on the one hand, of course, it makes so much sense. On the one hand, of course, it makes absolutely no sense. It's a bit of both. So it's the convert who converts, because even before the conversion, there's always a spark compelling them to convert. Okay, this is a classical idea that I have known and taught for years. Literally last night. You're the first people I've ever said this to, because I only learned this last night. Literally last night, I heard a teaching of the Rebbe. The Rebbe said that when it says a convert who converts, you know what that means? It means every true convert starts off with a Jewish soul. And that Jewish soul, for whatever reason, had to come to this world as a non-Jew. Come to this world to a non-Jewish mother. Came to the world as a non-Jew. But when they convert, that Jewish soul is now revealed. And that Jewish soul was always part of them. And that's what brought them to convert. So they're the convert who converts, because even before they convert, they're really a convert. They're really already a Jew. They just don't know it. And I was so unbelievably moved by that thought. It is so, so, so powerful. Obviously, the idea of understanding that every convert has a spark. But more than that, the Rebbe is saying, no, it's a Jewish soul that for whatever reason had to come into this non-Jewish world and then through conversion be able to be expressed.